Frank William Abagnale Jr. is widely known as a former con artist whose exploits inspired the best-selling memoir Catch Me If You Can and the 2002 film adaptation directed by Steven Spielberg. The narrative of a charismatic teenager cashing millions of dollars of fraudulent checks while posing as a pilot, doctor, and lawyer before age 21 has captured the public imagination. However, in recent years, many of Abagnale's most sensational claims have been credibly disputed by historians and journalists, even as there is substantial evidence he did engage in significant criminal activity. Abagnale later became a financial security consultant, building a career advising banks, corporations, and government agencies on fraud prevention, a transformation from criminal to professional consultant that forms part of his public persona. Frank Jr. was born to Frank W. Abagnale Sr. and Paulette Abagnale. He grew up in suburban New York, attending Iona Preparatory School in New Rochelle. His parents divorced when he was about 14 years old, a disruption that he later described as a turning point in his life. At age 15, his father gave him a credit card to buy gasoline for a part-time job. Rather than using it as intended, he colluded with gas station attendants to purchase car parts, then return them for cash, ultimately racking up about $3,400 in false charges, a significant sum in the early 1960s. When his mother discovered the fraud, he was sent to a Catholic school for juvenile offenders. According to public records, Abagnale also spent 3 months in the U.S. Navy between 1964 and 1965 before being discharged, an episode often omitted or stylized in his own narrative. Abagnale's most well-documented offenses involved check fraud, exploiting banking procedures of the 1960s. He learned that banks often credited deposited checks before they were verified with the issuing institution, and he deliberately used this gap. Frank's techniques were opening multiple bank accounts under false identities. Abagnale created bank accounts using fake social security numbers and forged IDs. Once checks cleared instantly, which they often did at that time, he withdrew cash before the bank realized the checks were invalid. Forging high-quality checks. He used better-than-average paper and accurate routing and account number combinations to make the checks look legitimate, often imitating corporate checks. Exploiting clerical trust. Bank tellers of the era did not have rapid electronic verification tools. When presented with convincing documents and a confident demeanor, clerks often cashed checks without delay. In his memoir, Abagnale claimed to have cashed more than 17,000 fraudulent checks, totaling $2.5 million during his years on the run. While Catch Me If You Can popularized this figure, researchers have questioned its accuracy, noting the pace and volume claimed is highly improbable given his documented periods of incarceration. One of the most famous parts of Abagnale's story, that he donned a Pan Am World Airways pilot's uniform and flew around the world for free, is partially true but significantly exaggerated. The verified part. Abagnale did pose briefly as an airline employee and secured access to free flights. Specifically, he called an airline, long said to be Pan Am, claiming to have lost his uniform and was directed to pick one up. With forged identification and uniform, he traveled as a deadheading crew member, a practice that allowed off-duty airline staff to occupy seats free of charge. Some sources suggest he flew hundreds of flights and possibly visited dozens of countries. The disputed part. Recent analysis shows that his pilot impersonation likely occurred after his first imprisonment in late 1968, not throughout his teen years. Public records indicate that his actual check fraud, tied directly to an airline logo, comprised 10 checks, totaling only about $1,450, far short of the dramatic millions cited. Some academic investigations suggest he may have impersonated TWA personnel rather than Pan Am in this period. Thus, while some form of airline impersonation occurred, the scope and scale portrayed in his memoir and film are likely embellished. Abagnale's book and public presentations describe him assuming numerous identities, doctor in a Georgia hospital, attorney in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, sociology professor teaching at Brigham Young University. These stories, while compelling, have little to no independent documentary evidence. Investigations into court records, employment histories, and academic rosters have failed to substantiate most of these claims, leading historians to conclude that these accounts may be fictionalized or exaggerated for dramatic effect. Similarly, his claims of passing the Louisiana bar exam and serving as an assistant attorney general have been challenged due to lack of verifiable records from the relevant institutions. Public records indicate that Abagnale was arrested numerous times in his youth. In June 1965, he was arrested in Eureka, California for car theft, stealing a Ford Mustang, and associated check fraud, among other charges. Shortly thereafter, he was sentenced to 3 years in New York's Great Meadow Prison for stolen blank checks. He served roughly 2 years before parole, but subsequent violations, including a stolen car conviction in Boston, sent him back to prison for an additional year. After release on December 24, 1968, Abagnale relocated to Baton Rouge and later fled to Europe. He was arrested in France in 1969 after a warrant was issued via Interpol. Detailed public records confirmed this detainment, and he served time in French custody before extradition to Sweden, where he served another sentence. Extradited back to the U.S., Abagnale faced federal check fraud charges. In April 1971, he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, though he served only about 4 years before being released on parole in 1974. He was also arrested later in 1974 for stealing camera equipment from a Texas summer camp, though he did not receive additional prison time for this charge. Despite some popular claims, official prison records show he was never incarcerated at the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, contradicting his own assertions of an escape from that facility. After his release, Abagnale began telling his story publicly. By 1976, he had founded Abagnale & Associates, a consultancy focused on fraud prevention. Journalistic sources and interviews document that he gave talks and training sessions to financial institutions, law enforcement units, and corporate security teams about check fraud and identity deception. Abagnale has often stated publicly that he worked with the FBI in an official capacity. However, investigations show that while he consulted widely in security contexts and spoke at FBI-related events, there is no credible evidence he ever worked for the Bureau as a formal agent or operative, nor that he was on an official most wanted list. In 1980, Abagnale published his memoir, Catch Me If You Can, The True Story of a Real Fake. The book became a bestseller, and Abagnale's appearances on television talk shows and panels raised his profile. Steven Spielberg's 2002 film adaptation, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, further popularized his story, cementing Abagnale as a cultural icon of youthful audacity, even if many details were dramatized for entertainment. In his later years, Abagnale continued working as a fraud prevention consultant, speaking internationally at conferences and advising corporations on identity theft and forgery risks. He published subsequent books and developed educational materials for financial institutions. He currently resides in South Carolina with his wife and family. While Frank Abagnale certainly committed check fraud and was arrested multiple times across international jurisdictions, numerous mythic elements from his memoir and public speeches have been challenged. Claims of posing as a doctor, professor, and long-term airline pilot are largely unsubstantiated. His assertions of massive winnings from check fraud are likely exaggerated. His supposed service as an FBI agent or long-term consultant within the Bureau is not supported by official records. Modern research suggests that the most remarkable con Abagnale ever pulled may have been convincing the world that his embellished version of events was factual. Yet beneath the myth lies a real story of youthful criminality, legal consequences, and a later turn toward public education and corporate consulting. Frank Abagnale's life underscores the fragility of pre-digital financial systems and how exploitation of procedural gaps can yield large-scale fraud. The power of personal narrative to shape public perception, for better or worse. The necessity of distinguishing documented fact from entertaining myth in histories of crime. Whether viewed as a cunning teenage criminal, a mythmaker, or a rehabilitation success, Abagnale's story continues to be studied as a cultural touchstone in conversations about identity, fraud, and redemption.